Story 1. He could tell I was nervous, as it was the first time I had been pulled over. He said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to put you in handcuffs." I replied, "Well, that would be kind of difficult," and lifted the sleeve of my amputated arm. Story 2. I ran a red light once and got pulled over. The police officer asked if I had been drinking. I said no, I was just a bad driver. He laughed and let me go. Story 3. Not exactly an excuse, but a trooper talked himself into giving me a warning, and I wasn't about to dissuade him. I was going about 8 miles per hour over the limit when he made a U-turn behind me and the lights came on. "What's the hurry tonight?" "Just ready to be home from work." "It smells like food in here." "What's that?" "Oh, I've got a couple of pizzas in the back." "Dinner for the family, huh?" It's not my problem if he felt sympathy for me feeding a couple of hungry kids when it was just my significant other and me. Story 4. It helped that we were dressed nicely because we were coming home from a funeral. Story 5. Act nice and play dumb. Being conventionally attractive helps. Story 6. I was speeding and pulled myself over. He came to my window, said, "I've never had someone pull themselves over before," and gave me a warning. Story 7. No excuses. Tell the truth and some police officers will let you off. I had one California Highway Patrol officer tell me, "I wasn't going to pull you over at all because I'm on my way off shift, but you kept speeding for 12 miles without ever noticing me behind you. You're the only person today who told me the truth, so I'm letting you off with a warning." Story 8. I wouldn't try this now, I've lost my lying superpowers. I got pulled over by a Maryland state trooper in a radar trap. I was 12 miles per hour over the speed limit. He asked if I knew how fast I was going. I said no. I added that he must have clocked me a half a mile or so back because I was having a heck of a time with my gas pedal sticking. He asked me to step out of the vehicle. I thought, I'm screwed. Next, he took hold of the gas pedal and moved it around a bit. The officer said he could see it was sticking slightly and that I needed to have it fixed right away. Then he gave me directions to a mechanic. Phew. Story 9. My wife got pulled over on our way to a labor and delivery class at the hospital. She was 7 months pregnant and insisted on driving because she thinks I am a slow driver when she is mad. She started panicking while we waited for the police officer, and I began laughing. She asked how I could do that. I said, "You are a pregnant woman speeding less than a mile from the hospital. You are not getting a ticket." Long story short, the police officer let us go. Story 10. He made an excuse for me. I was in uniform heading to work as a paramedic. He pulled me over, and when he walked up to the window he said, "Well, I guess I'll need you if I ever get shot." Then he started laughing, waved, walked back to his car, and drove off. Story 11. I admitted I was driving 20 miles per hour over the speed limit, said I was wrong, and apologized. The officer said that all night people had been denying it or acting confrontational. She said she appreciated my honesty and let me go. Story 12. I was going a little too fast and did not have my seatbelt on. I saw a speed trap too late and shouted the word fuck, then immediately pulled over. The officer drove over and laughed because he had read my lips. He told me to put my seatbelt on and drive slower. Postscript. I was really young. I always wear my seatbelt now. Story 13. Not an excuse, but my dog popped her head out of the window. The officer gave me a verbal warning and spent a good 8 or 9 minutes just loving on my girl. Story 14. My dad's friend bought a new Ferrari. Shortly thereafter, he was driving it down the Edens Expressway, Interstate 94, north of Chicago. He got it up to about 130 miles per hour and saw flashing lights in his rearview mirror. He slowed down and let the police officer catch up to him. When the officer reached the window, he said, "Even subtracting the speed limit from your speed, you still would have been 30 over." My dad's friend put on his most winning smile and said, "I'm sorry, officer. I just wanted to see why they charged me so much money for this car." The officer had him pop the hood so he could see the engine, and then gave him a warning. Story 15. I was pulled over for speeding. When the officer came to the window, he smelled the cannabis I had bought. The speeding was no longer the issue. He confiscated my cannabis, my buster, and an unused pipe, then gave me a warning for speeding. I asked if I could get my buster back because I had it for 10 years. He gave me a strange look and walked away. I was sad but accepted it. He came back to the car and said, "Remember what I did for you today?" He opened my buster, tapped out the cannabis into it, and returned it to me. To say I was surprised would be an understatement. It was very kind. When I got home, I saw that he had not emptied the tetrahydrocannabinol from the bottom of the buster, so I still had something, laughing out loud. I will never forget what he did that day. He was rather relaxed for an officer and did not have to give it back. I do not even smoke nowadays, but his kindness was memorable. Story 16. He walked up to me, and I recognized him from when he had stopped me about a month earlier. I said, "You stopped me before," and thought, what the heck? He obviously thought I was a complete idiot. He asked if I knew anything about baseball, to which I replied, He said, "Third strike, you're out. Don't let me catch you again," and let me off with a warning. I have not seen him again, so I consider that a win. Story 17. I just kind of kept my mouth shut and looked innocent. He said, and I quote, "If you are going to drive like an idiot, do it at night when there are fewer people around." He slammed my door and walked back to his vehicle. Story 18. An officer pulled me over. Before he said anything, I asked, "Morning, officer. Do you mind if I ask how long you have been sitting there?" He replied, "About 30 minutes. Why?" I said, "That's good. I did not want you to wait too long, so I got here as quickly as I could." We shared a couple of chuckles. He did not issue a ticket. Story 19. I told the police officer I was a little distracted and needed to get my son home. The police officer aimed his flashlight at the back seat. My son stared back, wide-eyed, stripped down to his diaper with mud all over him. He had fallen into a mud puddle, so I took his wet clothes off. The police officer laughed and asked me to slow down. No ticket was issued. Story 20. I saw him as I crested a rise. I looked down and I was 92 in a 65. I saw him start to move, so I pulled over. When he came to the car, he said he had never had someone pull over so quickly. I told him I knew I was speeding and that I was not going to make him chase me several miles down the road. I explained that I had not been paying close enough attention to my speed. He let me go and told me to drive safely and to pay more attention to how fast I was going. Story 21. I was pulled over for racing at a stoplight. The officer removed me from the car and presumed I had been drinking before driving, so he made me take a field sobriety test. He asked whether I had any medical conditions that would affect the test. I said I have Osgood-Schlatter disease in my knees. I only knew about it because a high school hockey teammate was diagnosed and could no longer play because of bad knees, and that I could not complete the balance portion of the test. The officer did not know what I meant and simply let me go without administering a breathalyzer. Story 22. The truck I was driving belonged to my dad. It had a broken gauge cluster, so I had no way to know how fast I was going. Story 23. I sincerely did not know it was an illegal U-turn. Otherwise, I would not have done it in front of you. Story 24. I took off my sweatshirt so he could see my t-shirt from the ambulance company where I worked. He scolded me for speeding. I should have known better. I saw him at a major crash the next day. He was right. 20 miles per hour over the speed limit in a small car was excessive. Story 25. I have yet to be pulled over, but my mom got out of a ticket in a hilarious way. She was on her way to pick my brother and me up from school and, as usual, brought our pet rat Rascal with her. He was trained to sit on her shoulder and loved to hide in my mom's hair. She ran a stop sign and got pulled over. The officer was completely thrown for a loop when Rascal peeked out of her hair. All he said to my mom was, "Ma'am, do you know there's a rat in your hair?" He didn't give her a warning. He just went back to his car and drove off. This was in the late 1990s. Story 26. A state trooper asked me if I knew how fast I was going in a 55-mile-per-hour zone. I told him I did not. It was 1:30 in the morning and there was not much traffic on the road. He said I was doing 72 miles per hour and wanted to know what the hurry was. I told him that it was the last day of work before starting a 2-week vacation. My first since the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic hit, almost a year. He told me to slow down and enjoy the vacation. I could not believe it. Story 27. I was getting a ride from a colleague when a state trooper pulled us over. I still had my bunker gear on and showed him my hand, which had just been badly burned in a training fire while we were on the way to the emergency room. Our interaction did not last long, and he gave us an escort. Story 28. I said that I was pregnant and needed to find a restroom as soon as possible. Neither was true. Story 29. Not mine but my dad's. He ran a red light and was pulled over. The police officer asked him, "Didn't you see the red light?" He replied, "Yes, I did, but I didn't see you." Apparently the officer was in a good mood and let him go with a warning. Story 30. I told him I knew I was speeding but that I really had to go to the restroom. He asked if I would like to go inside to use the restroom before he took my information. I had pulled into a gas station after seeing his lights, and I said I was pretty sure seeing his lights had really scared me. He laughed and gave me a warning. Story 31. I was pulled over by the sheriff of the county I was in. When he asked why I was speeding, I said I was only going 8 miles over the speed limit and that I was not from the area and had never driven that route before. He let me go, and because I had my 4-year-old daughter with me, he said she was adorable. Story 32. I said we were coming back from the dog track. He asked if we had one. I said no. He asked how I would pay for the ticket and let us go. Story 33. I had COVID-19 as I was returning from the hospital. I just wanted to go home. It was the first couple of weeks of the initial shutdown, and I was scared. Luckily, the police officer seemed afraid too. He told me to go home and drove off. Story 34. Back in college, I was driving 80 miles per hour in a 55 miles per hour zone on the New York State Thruway around 5 a.m. I didn't see the officer on the side of the road until I had just passed him. I knew I was caught. I was the only car for miles, so I immediately pulled over and turned off the engine. He slowly pulled up behind me. I couldn't have been 1/10 of a mile from where he had been stopped. The first thing I said was, "You got me." He laughed and thanked me for pulling over before he even had to turn on his lights. He checked my license and gave me a warning. Story 35. Admit it and just tell them that I should have been going slower. I have been pulled over about 5 times in my life for speeding and other things. I have never received a ticket. I am polite and tell the truth. I always keep my hands where the officer can see them. Story 36. When I was a kid, my mother was pulled over for speeding. She was flustered and angry, and before the officer reached our window, she put a cigarette in her mouth and lit it to calm down. She accidentally put the cigarette in backwards and lit the filter, so when she rolled down the window, she was trying to puff with a small flame on the filter. The officer laughed and said, "Never mind, you can go, ma'am," and sent her on her way. Story 37. A police officer pulled me over on the Belt Parkway a few years ago. The conversation went like this. Police officer: "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Me: "I'm sorry, officer. Probably because I'm an asshole and made a stupid move." Police officer: "You said it. Have a good night." He tapped the door sill, walked to his patrol car, and drove off. Story 38. "Do you know why I pulled you over? You're selling me a cop calendar?" He laughed, got all flustered, and told me to slow down. Story 39. I did not have an excuse. A police officer thought his radar gun malfunctioned. For background, I had a heavily modified 1995 Ford Taurus super high output. By heavily modified, I mean it was probably the quickest naturally aspirated super high output in Michigan. It was pretty gnarly. In 1989, Ford introduced the Taurus super high output. Under its hood was a 220 horsepower Yamaha-built V6 engine paired with a 5-speed manual transmission, which sent the front tires into oblivion. 220 horsepower may not seem like much until I remind you the 1993 Mustang Cobra had 235 horsepower. The late 1980s and early 1990s were not a boon to horsepower junkies. I was driving home from South Bend to Southwest Michigan along Highway 31 North, which we call the bypass. It was a beautiful Michigan summer day. I had the windows down and the stereo turned up. Traffic was almost non-existent, and I had my foot down. I came over a rise and saw the all-too-familiar gumball machine light of a Michigan State Police trooper perched beneath a highway overpass. Knowing I was about to go to jail, I immediately slowed and pulled over. I was already at a complete stop by the time the trooper reached my car. He walked up, asked for my license and registration, then walked back to his car without saying another word. I knew I was about to be charged with reckless driving. A few sweaty minutes later, he returned with my documents. "Mr. Ope, you got lucky today. I know you were speeding. You know you were speeding, but it would seem my radar gun is malfunctioning, because there is no way this car was doing 131 miles per hour. So slow it down and drive safely." He turned and walked away. For the record, the car was more than capable of over 140 miles per hour, verified by the Global Positioning System. Story 40. I told him I did not realize it. The rental speedometer was accurate, but my truck's was inaccurate, so I was used to it showing a higher speed than I was actually traveling. I deserved the ticket since I was speeding, even though I had not realized it or intended to. Story 41. It wasn't speeding. I wasn't paying attention. I hit a curb, went over it, and knocked down a parking meter. Like a good citizen, I went into the nearest business, a barber shop, and asked them to call a police officer to report an accident, which was true. A police officer arrived and came over to talk to me. Just before I told him what had happened, I realized I had never admitted that I did it. I glanced at my front bumper. It looked fine, with no fender damage. So I lied and said I had witnessed someone else do it and wanted to report it. I gave a fabricated description of the man I said I had seen. I never heard another word. That was well over 40 years ago. I'm pretty sure I got away with it. Story 42. Be respectful. Do you know why I pulled you over? The answer is yes. Yes, officer. When I saw you, I checked my speed and realized I was over the speed limit. I am really sorry. I should have been paying closer attention to my speed. Do not listen to people who tell you never to admit you were speeding or to only answer yes or no. Those people are wrong. Police officers are people. Treat them with respect and do not lie to them. I have avoided at least 5 tickets by being honest and respectful. Story 43. I rolled down all the windows, opened every closed compartment, turned on all the lights, and placed my hands on the wheel, holding my license and registration while feeling disappointed and depressed with myself. The law enforcement officer almost gave me a hug and sent me on my way. Story 44. A female police officer who had a crush on me in high school gave my wife at the time a ticket for a defective light. Story 45. I was pulled over 2 blocks from my father's house. The police officer asked what the rush was. My 3-year-old was in the back seat and is notorious for getting car sick. I thought quickly and lied, saying she was sick. He flashed his flashlight on her, and she promptly threw up. He waved me on. Story 46. He knew who I was because I gave him his coffee every day. He said I was probably late for work and told me to go on. I wasn't going to work. Story 47. The police officer who pulled me over was another pallbearer at my best friend's funeral. Story 48. I went to visit my wife at the hospital where she works after my shift. It was about 11 o'clock at night. I got in my car and started heading home, and about 3 minutes later I was pulled over for not turning on my headlights. The area was well lit, and I did not notice that my headlights were off because my car did not have automatic headlights. When the officer asked why I was driving without my headlights on, I explained what I had been doing and that I had not noticed because of the streetlights. He looked around the brightly lit parking lot where we had stopped and said, "Good point. Turn those headlights on and have a good night." Story 49. I never even got a chance to speak. The officer held out his hand and said, "License and registration." He then walked away and returned with a ticket. Story 50. I was driving 120 miles per hour and was pulled over. I told the truth. The hospital was basically shut down due to a network outage. There were no electronic medical records and many systems were offline, and I was trying to get there as soon as possible. A police officer escorted me to the hospital. In a second incident, I was trying to navigate around a long stretch of merging traffic on the highway to reach an airport exit. So I accelerated and was recorded at 104 miles per hour. When the officer reached my window, he first asked about my vanity license plate and what it meant. I explained my work with local, federal, and international law enforcement agencies and the military. He gave me a warning. My plate has gotten me out of a few tickets because I am asked about it about 75% of the time, and when you can talk about helping to put pedophiles behind bars or disrupting organized crime, it usually goes well. Story 51. I usually gave warnings as long as the drivers were not being abusive or endangering lives. If they argue or gaslight, they will 100% receive a ticket. Story 52. A police officer pulled me over one morning after I had dropped my wife off at her workplace. He asked where I was coming from. I told him I had been at the district attorney's office because my wife works there. He asked for her name. I gave it to him and he said, "Have a good day." Story 53. I told the officer the truth. I had hit the snooze button too many times, finally gave up, and turned off the alarm. While getting ready for work, I made the poor decision to sit down to wake up a bit more. I leaned back and dozed off. I woke to a call from a coworker. I was the designated opener and the only one scheduled that day with the key and alarm codes. Most of the morning crew were already there, standing outside in the rain and snow waiting for me, and I was their opening manager. I quickly got up, finished getting ready, left the house and sped toward work. The officer let me go on one condition: follow him and try to keep up. He returned to his patrol car, turned on the lights and siren, and pulled into the road with me right behind him. It was a good thing I had been stopped 8 blocks from work. I would not have been able to keep up. Story 54. When he claimed I was doing 15 over, I replied, "No, sir. I was doing 5 over and watching my speedometer." He replied, "Oh, I was 16 at the time." Story 55. I work in cancer research. I had a meeting with a doctor to go over a new protocol. I was driving 110 miles per hour in a 55 miles per hour zone when an officer pulled me over. I told him I had a meeting with a cancer doctor in an hour. I could have been arrested on the spot. Instead, he gave me a funny look, checked my plates and license, and wrote me a ticket for 20 miles per hour over the limit. As he left, he said, "Good luck." I did not avoid the ticket, but I did avoid jail. Story 56. I told him the truth. I was distracted. I was on my way into the city with my dog to the veterinarian. I was clocking almost 30 kilometers over the speed limit. He took pity on me and gave me a warning. I guess it helps that I have only received one speeding ticket in about 15 years. Story 57. My father was in the military, so I have United Services Automobile Association car insurance. I was pulled over for speeding, gave the officer my insurance card. He glanced at it, returned it, and said he really respected the troops, ma'am, before letting me off with a warning. Story 58. Sorry, I just got caught up listening to music, and I was not as focused as I should have been on my speed. I seriously appreciate the stop. It is a wake-up call. I just hope I get a warning. Story 59. My daughter was sick. It helped that she was in the back seat, throwing up. Story 60. Be super nice, respectful, and sometimes play dumb. Do not admit guilt openly. Lower your pride and say something like, "I know you are busy and working long hours, probably away from your family. I apologize for inconveniencing you today by taking your time to correct a small mistake." During the tensions after George Floyd's death and the defund the police movement, I would add, "I know the men and women in uniform are receiving a lot of criticism today. I have always felt they have one of the hardest and most important jobs, and I want to make this encounter as smooth and easy for you as possible." I also placed a blue stripe bumper sticker next to my license plate. I have not had a ticket in 4.5 years. Story 61. A police officer pulled me over. I was driving 45 miles per hour in a 30 miles per hour zone. The officer asked, "Can you tell me why you were speeding, ma'am?" I replied, "Well, officer, I was just in a real big hurry to meet you." He let me off with a warning and a chuckle. 6 years later, we got married, and I try not to speed anymore. Story 62. Not for speeding, but I did get pulled over. I had Taco Bell in the center console and my dog had her head out the window. She was stepping in my food, and I veered slightly into an empty turn lane to move her. So the officer pulled me over. I accidentally said her face was in my food instead of her feet and told him I had grabbed her tail to keep her inside, but she had stepped into my food. He leaned in and tried to talk to her, but she just stared. I looked at her and then back at him quietly. She made him so uncomfortable that he let me go. He said I could have been considered distracted driving, but her gaze unnerved him. I was laughing out loud. It was funny. Good girl. Story 63. I was already sobbing. He could tell it had nothing to do with him, and we had a nice chat about my new job as a veterinary assistant and how difficult my first euthanasia was. Story 64. I once made an illegal U-turn across a wide street in the Bronx. As soon as I did, I saw a police officer sitting at the intersection. I thought I was done for, but maybe they had not noticed. I came to a full stop at the light, then proceeded to make a right on red. Sure enough, they were on me in seconds with lights and siren on. One officer walked around my car with a flashlight while the other asked for my license and registration and whether I knew why I had been stopped. I was almost certain it was for the U-turn, but I played dumb and said no. Turned out I was not playing. He said I had run a red light and that there is no right on red in New York City. I told him I was from New Jersey and handed a New Jersey driver's license. I knew that law, but I thought it only applied in Manhattan, so I told him that. He said no, it applies in all 5 boroughs. They checked my credentials, then he asked if I had ever had a New York license. I was not sure why, since that should have appeared on the license check, but I assured him I had only ever had a New Jersey license. He let me go with a verbal warning. Always play dumb whether or not you are acting. Story 65. He literally said, "Holy shit, you are beautiful," and then I told him I would report him. Story 66. I cannot speak for myself, but years ago my daughter was pulled over when she was somewhat intoxicated. She told the officers that she had a mental disability and that she was cold. The police officers gave her a blanket and called her grandmother to pick her up. The officers went to the grandmother's house, picked her up, and drove her to where my daughter was so she could retrieve the car and take it home. It was surprising. Story 67. I told him my wife had run off with a police officer. I thought it was him and that he was trying to return her. Story 68. As a former law enforcement officer, I know the privileges that military and military police stickers on a vehicle can bring, so I have never placed one on mine. I am no fan of the average police officer. I understand how one bad officer can ruin your life, but I show respect by default. Some of the best people I have ever met wore a badge, and some of the absolute worst people I have ever met did as well. Story 69. I passed an unmarked trooper who pulled me over and asked why I had blown by him. I told him the truth. I did not recognize the new model of the Crown Victoria. He told me to slow down and let me off. Story 70. This happened to me not long ago. I am an older man and the officer was middle-aged, so I was not flirting my way out of it. It was about 1 a.m., and I was driving 70 miles per hour in a 55-mile-per-hour zone, about 2 miles from home. I told him I was eager to get home because it was late and I was not paying attention. He ran my plates and my license, told me to be careful, and let me go. Story 71. It was the late 1980s when a police officer pulled me over while my friends and I were returning from the video rental store. One of the guys in the back held up the cover of the animated Transformers movie and, in a childlike voice, said, "We got cartoons." The officer laughed and let us go. Story 72. I was driving my wife to the hospital when she was in labor. It was 2:30 a.m., and bars close at 2 a.m., so I imagined they were looking for impaired drivers. I was driving 60 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. The police officer looked young and did not know what to do. At first, he gave me attitude about speeding before he saw the situation. He looked at his partner, who said, "Get there safely. Good luck." I drove away before he changed his mind. Story 73. A friend's story. Still my favorite. He got pulled over and his wife was in the passenger seat. As the officer approached, she screamed that he was an idiot and should have slowed down. He took the hunched, submissive position. The officer took one look and let him off with a warning. They did it again. On the third time, the officer asked him to step out of the car. He thought, oh no. The officer then asked if he was all right and if he was being abused and needed help. My friend said no. She just got like that sometimes. The officer gave him his card and told him to call if he needed to. They never did it again. They are great people to hang out with. There are so many stories like that. Story 74. I was working the night shift at the time. I told him my boss was on me to be in on time and that I had lost track of how fast I was going. I was going a little over 50 in a 35. He asked if I had been pulled over before. I said no, and that was true. He was going to verify that, and if I was telling the truth, he would let me off with a warning. He pointed out that my driver's license was expired. This was during the coronavirus pandemic, so he said it was not a ticketable offense but suggested I renew it as soon as possible, which I did. My policy when pulled over is to be honest but not to volunteer unnecessary information. I was running late for work, but I was not going to tell him that I normally speed down that road and that I had simply failed to look for a police car this time. That would have been unwise. Story 75. Oatmeal, juggle, scale, crown, ancient, outgoing, frame, waiting, swim, crawl. Story 76. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. I had gotten my first speeding ticket ever. It happened where the highway becomes a road in the middle of nowhere, with no houses and no turnoffs. Rather than hitting the brakes, I took my foot off the gas to let the car slow down on its own. I guess a lot of people did that because a cop was behind a tree. 364 days later, if I went a year without another ticket and attended traffic school, the ticket would come off my record. If you live near the edges of Dallas, every other street is a different city. I turned into a different city without realizing the speed limit dropped 10 miles per hour for one block, and I got pulled over. All I could think was 2 more days and I would be clear. I had heard that crying might get me a warning instead. A motorcycle officer came to my window and asked for my license and registration. I clung to the steering wheel, looked down, and tried to squeeze out a tear, hoping to seem helpless. I told him I thought I was going the speed limit. He said, "No, I have you on radar." I said I believed him, that I had not seen the sign, and that I was so sorry. He kept writing and I felt like I was getting nowhere, so I tried harder to sound upset. I said my husband would be so mad at me, that he thinks I'm not careful enough, and that this would be proof. I kept sniffling, trying not to go over the top. He returned to his motorcycle and I peeked to see if any of it had worked, embarrassed I was even doing this. Then he came back and said he was giving me a warning this time, but to be more careful. I thanked him and told him I was grateful. As he walked away, I could not believe he had bought any of it. I felt like I had sold my soul to fool a cop who thought he was helping a woman avoid trouble with her husband. The guilt and humiliation were so great that I wanted to go after him and tell him to just give me the ticket. I laughed. Story 77. Calling a trooper half your age, sir, at every opportunity. Story 78. It wasn't an excuse, but it was the truth. I had just left a funeral for a college friend who had died of cancer. I was a fucking mess, but he let me go with a warning as long as we swapped drivers. I was with another friend who drove us the rest of the way. Horrid day. Story 79. I was about 20 or 21 and driving from my parents' house to my then boyfriend's house, now husband. I was about to take a back road and got pulled over almost immediately. I realized before the officer even reached my window that I had left my purse and, of course, my license at my parents' house, and I immediately started panic crying because I had never gotten into trouble before. I rolled my window down. When he came to the car, he recoiled and asked, "Are you okay?" I told him it had been a stressful day and that I was just leaving to see my boyfriend, but I had left my purse and I had never done that before. He took my registration, went back to his car for a minute, then returned to hand it back. He gave me a gentle, stern look and said, "Listen, I'm going to let you go, but I will be keeping an eye out. Turn around, go get your purse, and I don't want to catch you speeding again." I thanked him and did exactly as he asked. I didn't make that mistake again. Leaving my purse, of course. I still speed on that back road. Story 80. I was once asked by a policeman in Utah if I knew how fast I was going, and I answered that I did not know because the speedometer only goes to 95. I did not get out of that ticket. Story 81. If you are a woman, crying works pretty well. I started crying because I was genuinely upset. I was in my 20s and did not have much money. I asked the police officer if I could call my father. He said it would be okay, that he would give me a warning, and that I could call my father when I got home. Story 82. I told him that my wife was in labor. He was very happy that I had pulled over immediately. He recorded my speed at 116 miles per hour in a 60 miles per hour zone. The highway was empty. He issued a written warning and sent me on my way. Our son was born 5 minutes after we arrived at the hospital. Story 83. My husband is a police officer. I sort of had to prove it, but it worked. Story 84. I kept a warming bag in my car for pizza deliveries when I worked as a delivery driver. Before I left, I would put a shirt over my clothes. Whenever I was pulled over, I told the officer we were slammed and that I was hurrying back to the store to pick up another order, which is why I did not have a sign on my car. I said I had forgotten to grab one, because I had been called in and was not even supposed to be working that day. It worked 3 out of 5 times I was pulled over. The other 2 stops resulted in a seatbelt ticket and a failure to yield at a stop sign. The officer gave me $25 fines instead of a speeding ticket for driving 60 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone. Story 85. This is an interesting one. I told a female police officer I was on my way to a hospital because my friend was in labor and had no family in town. The officer let me go, and I later learned that the hospital did not have a maternity wing. Story 86. It was summer. I was swollen from pregnancy, it was hot as hell, I was retaining water, and I had to pee. I was almost home when blue lights appeared behind me. The police officer pulled up and asked if I knew how fast I was going. I said, I am sorry, I am due in 2 weeks and I really need to pee. He leaned into the window and got a good look at my large belly, my unlaced sneakers, and my clenched fists. He said, proceed to the police station a mile up the road, and I will radio ahead to have them clear the way to the bathroom. Story 87. I used the multiple silver minivan defense and won. The judge said my complaint was valid. There were 5 or 6 silver minivans in a row. Story 88. I was pulled over for driving 75 in a 55. I told the sheriff I was on my way to a restaurant to ask out a woman who worked there. I knew she was getting off soon. I had finally worked up the confidence to ask her out and was racing there before I chickened out. The officer let me go. I then went to the restaurant because their wings were on special. I was a hungry, foolish 18-year-old at the time. Story 89. I got pulled over for driving 74 miles per hour in a 55 miles per hour zone. The police officer asked me, "Did you not see the speed limit?" I answered, probably too honestly, "I know the speed limit. I did not see you." He laughed so hard he cried, gave me a warning, and I went on my way. Story 90. My brother just died. I am driving to be with my family. My girlfriend does not drive. I am going 8 kilometers per hour over the limit while crying. Just give me the ticket. Story 91. I have been let go on 3 separate tickets for being apologetic, respectful, and admitting what I did wrong. No excuse or lie has ever worked. Story 92. I have used the phrase "I am trying to get home" before I shit my pants a couple of times. Story 93. My father died last night, and I did not realize I was going that fast. I am sorry. He waved me off and told me to slow down. My father had passed 5 years earlier. Story 94. I cried, and because I was a 16-year-old girl, the middle-aged police officer became uncomfortable and let me go with only a warning. Story 95. I had morning fun with my husband before leaving for work. I was speeding because I was in a good mood and not paying attention. I told the police officer the truth. I had just had sex and was feeling good. He laughed, let me go, and warned me to stay alive for more good times. That evening, I took my son to his first wrestling practice. Guess who was his coach? 3 more years of teasing looks. Story 96. On my way to a funeral, I cut the announcement from the paper and showed it to him. Story 97. I told him I kind of freaked out when I saw him because my ex left me for a cop. He said, "But I was behind you with my lights on for 2 miles." I said, "I thought you were trying to return her." Story 98. The officer was a young man my age. I could tell he had just left the military. "Officer, I pulled you over because—" I cut him off mid-sentence and said, "Sir, I am about to literally soil my pants and was heading to that gas station right there. You can ticket me or arrest me, whatever. Just do it there while I am in the stall if you want." The officer burst out laughing and said, "Have a good dump." Story 99. I told them I was on my way to the hospital because a family member had a stroke. Both statements were true, but not at the same time. Story 100. From an ex, she would cry and say her father would be so mad. She was about 18 to 20. This worked many times because she drove like a speed demon. I want to say 4 or 5 times, but I think she said more. Eventually, a female police officer pulled her over, and crying did not work. Story 101. I was driving back from New York City on the Long Island Expressway. It was my birthday. I had just picked up narcotics and was late for work. I was driving alone in the high-occupancy vehicle lane. A police officer pulled me over right when the high-occupancy vehicle lane ended. I had my hat over my chessboard that was covered in drugs. The officer asked what I was doing and where I was going. I told him. Then he asked why I thought it was okay to be in the high-occupancy vehicle lane when I was alone. I lied, looked at the time and said I thought it was an hour later. The officer looked at my license and said, "It's all good, man. Go to work." Story 102. I am on my way to the airport to pick up my wife, and I am running late. I am way more scared of her than of a ticket. He said, "Yeah, I have a wife like that." We laughed, and he sent me on my way. Story 103. I cried because I was unemployed and on my way home from paying my car tax late. 2. My dad avoided a speeding ticket because he had just returned from Vietnam. Story 104. I have to poop and I live 1 mile straight ahead from here. It was absolutely true. Story 105. We were going up to our mother's place because our father had just died. That was true. I was driving over 70 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. The officer could tell we were not lying to him. He told us to slow down and that our mother needed 2 living sons that night. Not another tragedy. We thanked him and slowed down. Story 106. True story. I was pulled over for driving 45 in a 25-mile-per-hour zone and I began crying. After he wrote me the ticket, I told him why. I was around 10 to 12 weeks pregnant, I was bleeding and hormonal, and we had already had 3 miscarriages. I told him I thought I was miscarrying and that my husband was waiting at the fertility clinic. The officer looked like a deer in the headlights and offered me an escort, which I declined. My court case kept getting pushed off because they were building a new station, and I was days away from my due date when it finally came up. I showed up with a full pregnant belly, and the officer immediately remembered me and said it was the first time in his life he did not know how to respond. He said he wished I had told him before he wrote the ticket, which I had not because I did not want to avoid the ticket. I completely deserved it. He said he was going to drop it, and he was very happy I was still pregnant. Story 107. I was pulled over by a county sheriff while traveling on the interstate. Sheriff, do you know how fast you were going? Me, yes. I had my cruise control set at that speed. Sheriff, I clocked you at that speed. Wait, your cruise control was set at that speed? Why did you have it set that way? Me, my daughter is going to college in a town in the next state, and my mother has cancer and lives in a town in a second state farther on. I have been traveling this corridor at least once a month for the past 2 years. I have kept the cruise control at that speed on every trip. I passed 3 state troopers today with the cruise control set at that speed, and no one reacted until you did. I sincerely thought it was acceptable. Sheriff, I pull people over for that speed. Do me a favor and set your cruise control 3 miles per hour lower from now on. Drive carefully. Story 108. My father had died. I was speeding through a small town late at night to tell my grandmother, his mother, before anyone else did. I was pulled over and told the officer the news and asked him to write the ticket quickly if he had to. He waved me on. A few years later, I went through the same town. The sign said 50 miles per hour and 25 miles per hour when children are present. It was 10 in the morning on a weekday and I was going 50. I was stopped for going 50 in a 25. I said the lower limit applied only when children are present. He said it meant when school is in session. I scoffed and he let me go. The place is a speed trap. Story 109. I told him I wasn't from the area and was just visiting friends. I had been living there for 2 years and knew the speed limit, but my driver's license still had my old address, which was over an hour away. He told me to slow down. I got lucky because my friends and I had just hotboxed my car, and I had a can full of roaches in the cup holder. My heart was in my ass the whole time. Story 110. I told him I was on my way to my grandma's funeral. I had just gotten off the highway and did not realize it was a 30 miles per hour zone. All true. Story 111. No excuses. Roll down all your windows. Keep your hands on the wheel. Talk to them like a person because they are. Police at their core have a service mindset. Do not turn it into a you versus them hostile situation. You may not realize it, but they are on your side. You may be going too fast or acting unsafely, and they are checking for that for your safety and the safety of the general public. Use the stop as an opportunity to correct the issue. This applies to 99.8% of people in law enforcement or other public service roles. Story 112. I was driving 80 in a 65 zone in a small town in Northern California. I said I am from San Diego and we all drive 80. The police officer checked my record and it was clean, so he let me go. He was a good officer and appreciated how respectful I was. Story 113. I was on my motorcycle driving from just west of Chicago to Champaign, Illinois. I would lie on the gas tank, put my feet on the rear pegs, and zip around in and out of traffic as I drove down the road. This late afternoon I was driving on United States Highway 45, a 2-lane arterial road in each direction with a 45 miles per hour speed limit. I was doing about 80 miles per hour and weaving. There was a stoplight up ahead, so I slowed down and sat up straight like a normal motorcyclist. Lo and behold, I saw a police car right behind me with his lights flashing. Where did he come from? I pulled over and the officer got out and marched over. He was very angry. I've been following you for 2 miles, he said. What the hell are you doing? Sorry, officer. I said, I'm late for work. That was true, but not the real reason I was speeding. I would have done it anyway. I relied on the greater visibility a motorcyclist has to keep me out of trouble, but that technique kept me from noticing him. He took my license and registration, ran them and returned them. They were clean. He said, if I had you on radar, you'd have a ticket right now. But I don't. You're lucky. I'm sorry, officer. I'll be more careful. He did not want to hear it. He returned to his cruiser, drove away, and apparently issued a ticket to someone else. That scared the crap out of me. I probably kept it at 45 miles per hour for a good 3 miles after that. Story 114. I just bought this car and I didn't realize how smooth driving at 90 miles per hour felt. Story 115. I told him I was late for work and that my dad taught me how to drive. I was not using my blinker, against my mother's judgment. Story 116. It was not really an excuse. I could not find my driver's license. I even got out to look in the trunk, but it was nowhere to be found. I think it was less of a hassle to let me go than to arrest me for speeding and not having a license. I was driving 77 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. Story 117. If I get another ticket, my father will beat me. Never used that one, but a highway patrol officer told me that will work. Story 118. I told the police officer I was a little distracted and needed to get my son home. The officer aimed his flashlight at the back seat. My son stared back, wide-eyed and stripped down to his diaper, mud all over him. He had fallen into a mud puddle, so I took his wet clothes off. The officer laughed and told me to take it slower. No ticket. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.